What we have here is a slider with a text box. As you remember, a slider is a control which represents a value within a specified range. What are we going to do in case we want to display the current slider's value in the text box? In this particular case, we can either bind the text box to the slider or the slider to the text box. It depends on the requirements of a particular application. Let's firstly try to define a binding in the slider. We'll bind the value using the binding markup extension. We will bind it using the element name. We're binding it to the text box. To its text property, setting the mode in two-way. Let's run the application. When I'm dragging the slider's thumb, the text box is updating its text value. What I want to add here is that dragging the slider's thumb causes a great number of updates, hundreds of updates within a second if I'm dragging the thumb fast. In the real world, such a thing can cause performance issues. It would be great if bindings had a feature of periodic updates, and actually bindings have such a feature. In order to set the period for updates, you can use the delay property. Let's use it and look how it works. I'll set it to 500 milliseconds. And let's run the application. Now when I'm dragging the thumb, you can see that the text box is updating its value with delays. We've set the delay for 500 milliseconds. Super! Let's define the binding in the text box. Let's remove this binding and we will set it here. We're binding the text property to the value slider, to the value property of a slider, using the two-way mode. And let's run the application. And when I'm dragging the slider's thumb, the binding works as it has to be. But what will happen if I change the text of the text box? I changed it, and nothing happened. The slider hasn't received the updated value. I'll click the Tab button on my keyboard, and the slider's value is updated now. What happened? The thing is that bindings have an option which called update source trigger. It defines what should cause a binding to push updates. Dependency properties define the default value of the update source trigger in their metadata. Most dependency properties set it to property changed. It means that a binding pushes updates each time a dependency property changes its value. This is not the case of the text property of a text box. It sets it to lost focus value, what means that updates will propagate after a text box loses the focus. So if you want to change this behavior, you can set the update source trigger by yourself explicitly. Let's do it. We want to set it to property changed. And let's run the application and look if it works. Yes, I changed the value and the slider's value updates on each keystroke. The last thing I want to mention here is the string format option of bindings. As you've seen, the slider takes numbers of a floating point. We can use string format in the text box binding to format that number. For example, I want to display only 2 digits after the point, so I'll just set the string format. Let's run the application. And we see that string format is working. You can use string format as usual string.format method in C#. Great! Let's dig a little bit deeper and look at the source objects more closely in the next lecture.